are these people?
The Secret History of Polymarket, a read-through and commentary. So Mark Goodwin and Whitney Webb at Unlimited Hangout wrote this article together. It says it's a 55-minute read. That means it's a lot longer than that. Right? So The Secret History of Polymarket, she said the part one of a two-part series exposing the truth behind the world's most popular prediction market and its dark ambitions to alter both markets and representative government forever. Shane Coplin, who is now the world's youngest self-made billionaire, quote-unquote, is the public face of what purports to be the world's largest crypto-powered prediction market, Polymarket. Coplin and his alleged arch-rival, Tariq Mansour of the competing prediction market platform Kalshi, recently buried the hatchet to create a new venture capital firm called 5cc Capital, a reference to the section of the Commodity Exchange Act which is currently used to regulate prediction markets. The fund is aimed at bulking up the infrastructure for what has rapidly become an insurgent digital industry. That means lobbying's coming. Since the early days of Donald Trump's second term, prediction markets like Polymarket and Kalshi have largely been told to police themselves. This comes courtesy of the current head of the Consumer Financial Trade CFTC, Consumer Finance and Trade Commission, Michael Seelig, who was previously a lawyer representing major cryptocurrency industry clients. Seelig became the CFTC chair only after the Trump admin rescinded the nomination of Brian Quintenz, who then sat on Kalshi's board and worked for the crypto venture team at Mark Andreessen's firm, Andreessen Horowitz. So basically, no matter what, you were going to get a favorable ruling and a favorable lean towards these people. Andreessen Horowitz has notably backed Coplin's new prediction market VC firm, 5cc Capital, and is also heavily invested in Kalshi. So you've got a Mark Andreessen stake in this now. During the past couple of years, Polymarket and Kalshi have become important components of reporting on global finance and politics. This is partially due to their extensive cultivation of wide-ranging media partnerships, like I just showed you. For instance, in the case of Polymarket, the company now boasts partnerships with the Wall Street Journal and its parent company Dow Jones, as well as Yahoo Finance, Substack, and the live streaming platform Party, which I've never heard of. While these partnerships have been framed as an effort to further legitimize prediction markets, concerns have been raised that these media partnerships could be used to intentionally manipulate these very markets via the implantation of false and misleading stories. And she links here to a Columbia Journal Review article about Polymarket spreading misinformation on Twitter. Concerns like these have dogged these new prediction markets just as their star has risen. Insider trading allegations, including from the platforms themselves, have shown how prediction markets can be abused by traders with insider access to market movers and policymakers. Now, with Congress trying to get involved, both Polymarket and Kalshi have announced new efforts to improve market integrity without the need for government intervention. No, guys, don't bother. We got this. However, the effects of their efforts remain to be seen, as several of the new measures are based on traders self-reporting their conflicts of interests, which we know how well that's going to work out. Okay? Concerns about widespread insider trading have only been exacerbated by both the White House's open dismissal of these concerns, as well as the Trump family's close ties to both Polymarket and Kalshi. How this is not a massive story and how the corporate media isn't covering this conflict of interest on a daily basis, I don't understand. For instance, Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., we know is both a strategic advisor to Kalshi and also advises Polymarket. And again, there's a link to an NPR article about that. Trump Jr. is also a major investor in Polymarket via his venture capital firm, 1789 Capital. And I believe Descent and Bloom will know that reference They're part of the Rockbridge Network. She did an amazing article about Rockbridge Network we read. The evidence of insider trading on these platforms, particularly in cases where it is directly related to Trump's most consequential decisions, is now widely acknowledged by mainstream media. While the ascendance and arguably the normalization of insider trading are being treated as unintended flukes of these markets, there's an argument to be made that they're operating exactly as intended. That's not the bug. That's the feature. Some of the evidence for that argument can be found in what appears to be Polymarket's true origins. This is where we get into it. Despite being nominally founded in 2020, Kaplan, in founding his company, was admittedly following the model of the big tech billionaires he'd admired as a teen, particularly those who created their flagship companies by rebranding and privatizing controversial military programs from the George W. Bush era for maximum profit and seemingly to advance even darker ambitions. And she's got receipts. Previous reports from Unlimited Hangout have explored how Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook gave new life to the Pentagon's LifeLog program the day it was shut down, and how Peter Thiel's Palantir was created as a privatized version of the Pentagon's surveillance dragnet program. Total information awareness. In this two-part series, we now examine how Shane Kaplan appears to have rebranded and privatized yet another failed Pentagon program from that same era. And how Thiel is also involved here as well, I believe. Now, what she's referring to here is an article she wrote about J.D. Vance 2 years ago, where she broke down Peter Thiel and how he became at the center and forefront of pushing J.D. Vance toward the vice presidential nomination and selection with Trump. I read that article on my show 2 years ago, and I made a graphic that actually laid out Thiel's relation and all the players and organizations that were involved. And now you're adding in Kalshi and these prediction algorithm markets, or whatever they call them, the PAMs. By following in the footsteps of his admitted idol Zuckerberg, and then backed by funding from Thiel-linked sources, Kaplan has managed to resurrect the policy analysis market, or PAM, like I just said, one of the most controversial Pentagon programs from its now defunct Information Awareness Office. Tellingly, his efforts to launch Polymarket included direct communication with one of the main architects of the PAM program, and he was also greatly influenced by another apparent Thiel-linked effort to resurrect PAM that failed, which she also mentioned in her tweet. Importantly, Kaplan's apparent rebrand of PAM, often referred to in the past as the terrorism futures market, is about more than just reaping mega profits in an era where insider trading and financial corruption are flourishing with the White House's blessing. As will be explored in part 2 of this series, an ulterior motive directly linked to Kaplan's efforts aims to advance an extremely dystopian governance model that is of great interest to the tech billionaires now closely linked to Kaplan and the dominant prediction market companies such as Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen. I'm going to pause there for a second, say hey to everybody. Again, we're reading the Whitney Webb, Mark Goodwin article from UnlimitedHangout.com about Polymarket and its insidious, its origins and its insidious nature as well, where she then gives a brief history of the American prediction markets. And I'm going to glaze over this part because while it's important, I think a lot of this will come to light as we continue to read the article. So I'm going to skip to the next part where we get back into the late 90s and into 2000s. We talk about 92, 94. All this is important. This is an important exchange right here. They talk about the history of prediction markets. So the world's first betting market was called the Foresight Exchange, all right, where that they traded something called credit bills. It was like fake money, kind of like cryptocurrency almost, right? Everyone had play money. Hanson's co-founders, all right, were employees of the Canadian government, Alberta Research Council. All right. James and Morgan became interested in this paper that outlined the concept of idea futures and decided to make this ideas a reality. Right. So he had written a paper for visiting researcher for the Foresight Institute. So Foresight became this prediction market. So then that evolved into, and people remember the Hollywood Stock Exchange, HSX, again, with fake money, they'll give you a certain amount of fake money and you can invest in certain actors or movies or whatever, and then grow your portfolio. All right. Guess who was involved in this? And I know Golden Monarch remembers Max Kaiser of a Bitcoin lunatic and RT fame. All right. Movies were incidentally the focus of the world's next prediction market, the Hollywood Stock Exchange market, HSX. Founded in 1996. Again, prediction markets go back 30 years. Described by the New York Times as a virtual stock market of fake stocks and fake money with such a fanatic following that players are offering hundreds of real dollars to buy a make-believe portfolio, a digital basket of actors and movies. It was insane. Created by two men who were at that point best known as veterans of Wall Street, but had since become better known for other pursuits, like Max Kaiser, who went on to become best known for his early and often eccentric evangelism of Bitcoin, while the other co-founder, Michael Burns, is now best known for his top role at Lionsgate Films. So there's a biography about him. So this is really interesting. Guess who else ties into this? Our Commerce Secretary, Mr. Nutlick. In 2001, something else happened in 2001. Along with its critically important patents, which was acquired by Cantor Fitzgerald, the American financial services firm long held by the current Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, a.k.a. Nutlick. Lutnick and Cantor had planned to do away with HSX's play money and lead the push to turn speculation on movie performance into real money via commodity futures contracts. In other words, they sought to pioneer a film futures market. Paul G. Anderson explained the concept of Cantor's proposed film futures market as follows, quote, unlike the various physical commodities that trade on futures exchanges, such as corn, oil, and wheat, the relevant commodity in a film futures contract is an intangible financial instrument, a DBOR, whose financial value is tied directly to the domestic box office revenue, that's DBOR, domestic box office revenue, from ticket sales of the underlying motion picture. Thus, any film futures contract is an agreement to buy or sell DBORs at an agreed-upon price, regardless of the market value at the time that cash settlement is due. All right, that's like options in a way. In this respect, film futures are akin to futures contracts for stock indexes or U.S. Treasury bonds and other non-traditional commodities that are commonplace on most futures exchanges. That's interesting. Again, it's a little bit technical financial speak, but they were trying to take fake money and now introduce real money and figure out how do we regulate this so they let us open it up to people bidding real money on this stuff. And he just saw dollar signs in his eyes. Cantor's initial push for the film futures market was closely related to the efforts of the Republican-led Congress to pass the Commodity Futures Modernization Act in 2001, a law which facilitated, among other things, the exotic trading instruments that later played a significant role in the 2008 economic crisis, meaning derivative swaps, all right, credit default swaps. Those are the exotic trading instruments that Whitney's referring to. But what's crazy is that roughly 4 months after acquiring the Hollywood Stock Exchange, Cantor Fitzgerald's main location in New York City was obliterated during the 9/11 attacks. They were on the 102nd floor of the World Trade Center, with Lutnick being among the small handful of survivors who happened to be out of the office when the towers were struck. Wow, what a miracle. How lucky. Just like Lucky Larry. As a result of the massive loss of employees and company assets, Lutnick's efforts to merge play money prediction markets with futures trading were delayed until roughly 2007, when he and Cantor began to revive their prior efforts to pursue film futures. So, what happens? Lutnick then hires Rich Jacobs. Again, these names are going to matter because they end up coming to light later on as Polymarket really starts to get going. These people continue to resurface. So again, Rich Jacobs, who was a derivative specialist, together with Lutnick, they mounted a congressional charm offensive. By 2010, they had managed to get approval from the CFTC. However, due to congressional opposition related to the 2008 financial crisis and also from the MPAA, their efforts were for naught. The negative mood, both in Congress and beyond, saw a clause added to the Dodd-Frank Act that saw the domestic trading of film futures explicitly banned. Yeah, that sucked for Howie. But he's got an asset that he's just sitting on, waiting for the right moment. While his efforts to legalize real money prediction markets alongside Howard Lutnick may have failed, Rich Jacobs has since become the head of market expansion for Polymarket. They don't die, they multiply. So, DARPA discovers prediction markets. Let's go back a little bit to early 2000s. Robin Hanson, who was the inventor of Idea Futures, who had helped create the Foresight Exchange, got his biggest break to expand on his ideas and develop a new prediction market just a few months before Cantor Fitzgerald acquired the Hollywood Stock Exchange with the hopes of building an unconventional futures market. That break came courtesy of the Department of Defense, now the Department of War, and its sub-agency, DARPA. Sometime in the year 2000, sorry, that's a Conan O'Brien reference for all the old people. Michael Foster, a DARPA program manager working on quantum computer research backed by the National Science Foundation, learned of Hanson's efforts as well as those of the IEM, that's the first market. Foster then convinced colleagues at DARPA that their agency should fund research into prediction markets that could potentially be used to guide public policy decision-making. This was notably years before Hanson independently developed his ideas of futarchy, all right, which posits using prediction markets as a system of public governance. These ideas, again, and their relevance today are discussed in part 2 of this investigation, where they're literally going to try to get people to legislation passed based upon what was popular on Polymarket. That's what I see coming. Okay, DARPA was also interested in prediction markets for other reasons, as some of the agency's managers also believed that a prediction market could serve as an aggregation mechanism capable of bypassing bureaucratic and political obstacles to information sharing among U.S. national security agencies. This belief is directly related to efforts of those same national security agencies immediately after the 9/11 attacks to blame the siloing of information, we've seen this before, within agencies for the supposed failure of imagination that allowed the attacks to occur despite the ostensible efforts of the U.S. intelligence apparatus and the warnings, and maybe it was an inside job. Of course it was, but okay, YouTube, don't suspend my channel. This is, of course, despite the copious evidence pointing to the direct involvement of intelligence agencies in the 9/11 attacks, and she's got receipts, probably the Corbett report. There it is. All right. In the 9/11 attacks and in the efforts to stifle any meaningful investigation into those attacks. Again, we watched the 9/11 in 5 minutes a couple of months ago in the lightning round. Just one of the best pieces of work ever done on the internet. Nevertheless, the intelligence community's own narrative, backed by intelligence-linked contractors like Oracle's Larry Ellison, was that extensive information sharing between federal agencies and their main contractors was necessary to prevent another 9/11 style attack from occurring. These narratives then set the stage for the deployment of intelligence-linked software programs that were promoted as solving these problems. First, of Christine Maxwell's Chiliad. Yes, Christine being Ghislaine's sister, and followed by Peter Thiel's Palantir. Then CIA Chief Information Officer Alan Wade was closely connected to the origins of both Chiliad and Palantir. He had also been a close working partner of the DARPA office that would later host the surveillance program Total Information Awareness, a Palantir predecessor, as well as the DARPA-backed prediction market Hansen would help create. So this guy, Alan Wade, he's a behind-the-scenes guy alongside John Poindexter that pushed all of these things forward. In May of 2001, DARPA issued a request for proposals, one of which was called Electronic Market-Based Decision Support. According to an archived version of the proposal, again, she's just looking at the receipts here. So tell me how this is. What was it that this clown said? What it was? This was mental illness, right? What's mental illness here? Looking at the May 2001 DARPA issuing RFP? According to an archived version, the request sought applicants that could design one or more markets to predict events in a limited domain of interest to the DoD, and then subsequently manage that market. Contracts related to this project were awarded to two companies, one of which was Neoteric Technologies and NetExchange. Neoteric was a military contractor specializing in information technology and AI, which subcontracted a company called Martech to handle this specific proposal. Martech was a private company composed largely of the architects of that IEM, the first exchange. NetExchange was a company that focused on combinatorial markets, i.e., markets in which bundles of items are bought and sold, and in applying for DARPA funding, sought to create a combinatorial prediction market. These are the people that created the credit default swaps and the derivatives so that they could cut up bad loans and repackage them, sell them as good, and they're the ones that crashed the market, by the way, or the bankers did, using their prediction markets. Hansen, then teaching at George Mason University, as well as another George Mason professor, David Porter, were recruited to work for NetExchange's program, which would later become known as the Policy Analysis Market, or PAM. Hansen also served as the system architect for PAM. So he wasn't just any normal guy, he was the guy. Also consulted on this program was the team of tradesports.com/intrade, an Ireland-based prediction market funded by Paul Tudor Jones, Stan Druckenmiller, and Rupert Murdoch. So now you've got foreign investment and foreign-based companies getting involved in DARPA military projects. That's not good. It's then Chief Executive John Delaney, who later died while scaling Mount Everest in 2011, nothing suspicious there, told the UK's Evening Standard that it had additionally offered DARPA and PAM its data service and assistance. A year later, in 2002, Michael Foster's DARPA program, Futures Markets Applied to Prediction, or Future Map, which had included the Hansen-affiliated PAM, was placed within a newly created office at DARPA called the Information Awareness Office, the IAO. The office had been created at the behest of John Poindexter, like I said, known simultaneously for being the highest-ranking Reagan administration official convicted in relation to the Iran-Contra scandal, and also for being the godfather of modern surveillance. He's a lot less known for that. Again, that's New York Magazine from September of 2020, from Palantir, inside Thiel and Karp. Poindexter was subsequently hired as a DARPA executive and put in charge of the new office he had lobbied for, IAO. IAO's flagship program, Total Information Awareness, an unprecedented surveillance dragnet that sought to develop predictive applications for national security and law enforcement, similar to pre-crime, was also Poindexter's brainchild. The IAO also housed various projects aside from TIA, Total Information Awareness, such as Foster's Future Map program, of which Hansen's PAM was a part. So all of this is under one umbrella, all government run. But what happens is the government decides that this stuff is best run under private eyes without government oversight. So they offload it. Here we go. Just like TIA, the goal of PAM and Future Map at large was avoiding surprise and predicting future events. Whereas Total Information Awareness sought to predict terrorist and criminal activity before it could occur through mass surveillance of Americans' daily activities, PAM focused on using market-based techniques for similar ends. However, in the case of PAM, its efforts to predict events included but went far beyond terrorism. PAM also sought to focus on global and regional political stability, predicting the timing and impact of emerging technologies, predicting the outcomes of advanced technology and other future events of interest to the Defense Department. Also, by the way, they are connected to the CIA, so they have unique insight into this information. All right. Hansen has noted that other areas of interest also included growth rates or oil prices. So again, we're getting back to the history of how Polymarket came to be, how it came to exist, how the government created it, how the government used it, and then decided to offload it and make it a private thing that Peter Thiel got his grubby fingers on and handed to one of his buddies. Okay, TIA and PAM, along with the vast majority of the programs housed within the IAO, were intended to interface. Put differently, PAM and other IAO programs were created with the intention of being directly connected to Total Information Awareness, aka Palantir, and to each other in order to improve the accuracy of predictions. That's being able to predict your behavior before you ever do it. This is even reflected in the logos of PAM and TIA. The IAO, or the Information Awareness Office, or Total Information Awareness logos, were seeing eyes with surveillance, shows a one-eyed pyramid surveilling the entire Earth, flanked by the phrase "Science is power" in Latin. The PAM logo places the pyramid within the letter A, and that pyramid, like the TIA pyramid, is also surveilling the Earth while also shooting out a beam from its opposite side that touches a market graph. So, now connect all of this to the data centers also. There's the logos. So there's your all-seeing eye looking at the world and touching a graph with a rainbow, and you got the all-seeing eye looking at the world there. PAM not only involved Hansen and the DARPA contractor that employed him, NetExchange, but also intimately involved the Economist magazine's Economist's Intelligence Unit. Also important. Why? Though most know The Economist for its media publications, the EIU offers its services to businesses and governments and provides them with forecasting and advisory services. Gartner and other companies also provide this level of forecasting. They offer, among other services, reports on the economic, political, and business environments in 205 countries to help their clients understand how the world is changing and how that creates opportunities to be seized and risks to be managed. When companies look to potentially enter a new country or a new market, they will reach out to a company like this to get a market dump of research about the country. And will their product, and then do some type of market testing to identify if their product or solution will fit in that market. All right. According to the new PAM website, the Economist Intelligence Unit was working with the Net Exchange to collect and process the data on which the securities in PAM are based, and then to assess the value of the securities when they mature. Not really a surprise. But they needed some data from the market, and they're getting that from The Economist. Coincidentally, around that time that the EIU was becoming involved with DARPA and PAM, here's a name we know, Lynn Forrester de Rothschild and her husband, Evelyn de Rothschild, who boasted close ties to figures like Henry Kissinger and Jeffrey Epstein and the Clintons, sought a 26.9% stake in The Economist's parent company, which was finalized in 2003. So now you've got the Rothschilds in control of this EIU and the reporting that it's putting out. Reportedly, due to the high cost of the EIU services per country, the designers of PAM decided to focus on 8 Middle Eastern nations for their prediction market experiment: Turkey, Syria, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Jordan, and Egypt. You know, it seems like they're all in a specific part of the world, and again, they're specifically looking at the Middle East. The intention was to have select participants engage in trading activities every 3 months for a 2-year test period to determine the prices for 5 different parameters for each nation. They included U.S. financial involvement in each, U.S. military activity in each, that nation's economic growth, the level of political instability, and its own military's activities. So you got 5 different things here. They should have bullet pointed this, made it easier. Traders were also expected to predict values for common economic indicators like GDP, as well as security indicators such as casualties resulting from terror attacks in the West and casualties of the U.S. military. Like literally, they had to. Yes, they're now expecting to predict the value. How many people were they going to lose in the next year from a terror attack? That was part of this market. The chosen traders could also trade futures on future events that might occur within any of the 8 Middle Eastern nations. None of these people might be connected to the CIA or the Mossad to engineer any of these things to actually happen so that they know that when it actually happens, what happens to the prediction markets. Nah, that could never have happened, right? I'm just speculating. Hansen expands on this in an article. He later writes about PAM and its efforts, stating that traders would be allowed to predict millions of combinations of the parameters, such as how moving U.S. troops out of Saudi Arabia would affect political stability there, how that would affect stability of the neighboring nations, and how all that might change oil prices. Or maybe if they block the Strait of Hormuz, maybe they game that out. Can't imagine. Similar trades could, for example, have predicted the local and global consequences of invading Iraq had the markets already been ready at that point. Ridiculous. Yes, I agree, Natalie. This is so fucked. Okay. And this was, again, happening 20 years ago. But it got shelved because of the financial crisis. So initially, the goal was to have the select traders who used PAM be employees of the U.S. federal intelligence agencies. However, this became complicated by the legal barriers around conditional transfers of funds between federal agencies. Instead of having employees of different intelligence agencies compete, Pam then sought to recruit its traders from a single intelligence agency. However, no agency reportedly showed enough interest. Sure. As a result, they decided to open the market to select members of the public, which they were only able to do because as agents of the Defense Department, they were technically exempt from anti-gambling laws. This is insane. The architects of PAM had intended to launch test operations in September 2003 with a full launch plan for January 2004. However, that timeline got interrupted when PAM became the target of significant congressional and media criticism in July 2003, which saw PAM publicly branded as the terrorism futures market. Yes, cookies, that's right. All of this is the precursor to Polymarket and Kalshi. This is how they had the prediction markets laid out for the Defense Department and DARPA. This is a Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin article from Unlimited Hangout that was published last week. Okay, that's exactly what happened. So she's going into the history of prediction markets and how this all leads into Peter Thiel bringing this idea to Shane Copland and, hey, here's an idea to create out of your garage, and then gets Defense Department support for it. But the problem here, again, was that the terrorism futures market, i.e. PAM, was intensified by the earlier scrutiny of this Total Information Awareness Program that, like PAM, was housed under that Poindexter-run department at DARPA. So on July 28, 2003, you had two Democrats, Ron Wyden, he's still around from Oregon, and Byron Dorgan, held a joint press conference where they criticized DARPA for spending millions of dollars on some kind of fantasy league terror game, which they argued was absurd and frankly ought to make every American angry. Those sympathetic to Pam's ambitions later pointed out that Wyden and Dorgan had held their press conference when DARPA's public relations manager was out of the office and unreachable, thus depriving that agency of a chance to offer a timely and informed response to the senator's allegations. Whether they knew that in advance and scheduled it to make sure that they couldn't respond accurately and quickly, I don't know, maybe. A day later, the New York Times described PAM as an online futures trading market, disclosed today by critics, in which anonymous speculators would bet on forecasting terrorist attacks, assassinations, and coups. Following the Times' lead story, a litany of negative articles quickly appeared in the nation's press shortly thereafter, and on July 29, 2003, the Pentagon announced that it would abandon its plans to make PAM a reality. Public and congressional concern over both PAM as well as Total Information resulted in Congress cutting the funding for that office entirely via legislation that was signed into law in September of 2003. So now it gets cut. And immediately, Total Information Awareness gets bought and turns into Palantir. Like within months. Hansen has since expressed his views on the events that led to the shuttering of PAM and seems to regard the efforts of Wyden and Dorgan as somewhere between misguided and outright dishonest. In addition, in a 2021 interview with Richard Hanania, not a guy I like, but still, Hansen also expressed his view that PAM had largely failed because 2 years after 9/11, people were no longer afraid enough. He stated that the following about what he described as his betting market publicity fiasco in 2003. Right? This was soon after 9/11, and just 2 years later, people looked at the betting markets and said, oh, you're betting on death? That's terrible. You have to shut them down. If they were really scared of terror attacks, if they were actually feeling a large degree of threat, they would have said, to heck with this rule against betting on death. Let's turn on these markets. Let's find out where the attacks are going to be so we can stop them. Sure. Because at that time in 2021, Well, I don't know. Again, that's which guy? That's Porter, I think, or Hansen. I don't know if Hansen has a stake in Polymarket or in prediction markets at this point. But remember, we're privatizing the Information Awareness Office. All right, so that's where Peter Thiel and Poindexter's dream comes into fruition and becomes a private company that no longer has congressional oversight to worry about. While it seemed that the IAO and its controversial projects had been offed by a responsive Congress, it would emerge just a few years later the TIA was never actually shut down, despite being defunded by Congress. Not only were various aspects of total information awareness and other information awareness office projects covertly divided among U.S. military and intelligence agencies, but the core surveillance software the TIA had planned to wield began to be developed by the private company now known as Palantir, with considerable help coming from John Poindexter himself, as well as the CIA's chief information officer at the time, Alan Wade. I mentioned that name before. Wade had notably been one of Poindexter's main allies and collaborators on total information awareness prior to its defunding by Congress. So they got the band back together. This again is another article about Palantir and Tiberius by Unlimited Hangout you should definitely read. In 2020, Unlimited Hangout detailed the numerous parallels between TIA and Palantir and noted the following: that at the time it was formally launched in February of 2003, the TIA program was immediately controversial, leading it to change its name in May 2003 to Terrorism Information Awareness, in an apparent attempt to sound less like an all-encompassing domestic surveillance system and more like a tool specifically aimed at quote-unquote terrorists. Remember who they're calling the terrorists now. The TIA program was shuttered by the end of 2003. The same month as the TIA name change, and with a growing backlash against the program, Peter Thiel incorporated Palantir. Thiel, however, had begun creating the software behind Palantir months in advance, though he claims he can't recall exactly when. I mean, those details are really foggy now. All right. Thiel, Karp, and other Palantir co-founders like Joe Lonsdale claimed for years that the company had been founded in 2004, despite the paperwork of Palantir's incorporation by Thiel directly contradicting this claim. They lie through their teeth. Even when the receipts show that they're lying, they don't care. They continue to double down. Also in 2003, apparently soon after Thiel formally created Palantir, arch neocon Richie Pearl called Poindexter, saying that he wanted to introduce the architect of TIA to two Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, Thiel and Karp. According to a report in New York Magazine, Poindexter was precisely the person whom Thiel and Karp wanted to meet, mainly because their new company was similar in ambition to what Poindexter had tried to create at the Pentagon, that is, total information awareness. During that meeting, Thiel and Karp sought to pick the brain of the man now widely viewed as the godfather of modern surveillance, unquote. That unholy meeting, in addition to the above parallels, there's also the added fact that Palantir's supposedly novel selective revelation functionality, an alleged privacy safeguard, as well as Palantir's immutable log concept are not novel at all and were borrowed clearly from total information awareness. It's also of note that Palantir's software stemmed from an anti-fraud algorithm called Igor, created by Thiel and Max Levchin at the company they co-founded, PayPal. Yes, PayPal Mafia. In a controversial conversation with Charlie Rose in 2013, Levchin explained that, quote, when we were working on security and anti-fraud measures at PayPal, i.e. what would become the basis for Palantir, we collaborated with every imaginable 3- and 4-letter agency, and those were some of the best, most productive relationships I've had as a business person. While Poindexter's own role in the privatization of total information awareness into what is now Palantir was recently noted, the CIA and its chief information officer, Alan Wade, were also intimately involved in privatizing TIA, which was also reported in Unlimited Hangout. I believe this again was in 2024. She reported this. Soon after Palantir's incorporation, though the exact timing and details of the investment remain hidden from the public, CIA's In-Q-Tel became the company's first backer, aside from Thiel himself giving it an estimated $2 million. In-Q-Tel's stake in Palantir would not be publicly reported until mid-2006. Why would that be? The money was certainly useful. In addition, Alex Karp recently told the New York Times that, quote, the real value of the In-Q-Tel investment was that it gave Palantir access to the CIA analysts who were its intended clients. They gave them the software in order to develop it. A key figure in the making of In-Q-Tel investments during this period, including Palantir, was CIA Chief Information Officer at the time, Alan Wade. Are we seeing a pattern here between Wade, Thiel, Poindexter, and now Karp? The CIA would continue to be intimately involved with Palantir well past this point. In fact, they became connected to such an extent that it's perfectly reasonable to argue that they are, for all intents and purposes, a CIA front company. For instance, in following the In-Q-Tel investment in Palantir shortly after it was incorporated in 2003, the CIA was Palantir's sole client until 2008, and as Karp stated, CIA analysts were always the company's intended clients. One of the company's two top engineers, one of Palantir's top 2 engineers at the time, Aki Jain, recalled making hundreds of trips to CIA headquarters between 2005 and 2009, where the CIA tested and tweaked, quote unquote, Palantir's products. Palantir has since gone on to become a contractor to all 18 U.S. intelligence agencies and, of course, much more. And again, here's the military origins of Facebook. That's another talking about how it was DARPA run from LifeLog. All right, I'll go a little bit longer, then we'll cut out to some more stuff. But this is really fascinating stuff. This is great stuff from Whitney and Mark. At the same time that Peter Thiel was devising the privatization of total information awareness with his fellow Palantir co-founders, John Poindexter and Alan Wade, he was also suspiciously present in the apparent privatization of yet another DARPA project called LifeLog. Again, LifeLog at DARPA was overseen by Poindexter's close friend Douglas Gage, though it wasn't housed under the formerly Poindexter-run IAO office as TIA and PAM had been. LifeLog aimed to, and now LifeLog again was part of DARPA, right? Not IAO. Now, LifeLog aimed to build a database tracking a person's entire existence that included an individual's relationships and communications, their phone calls and mail, etc., their media consumption habits, their purchases, and much more in order to be able to build a digital record of everything an individual says, sees, or does. LifeLog would then take this unstructured data and organize it into a discrete episode or snapshots while also mapping out relationships, memories, events, and experiences. Kind of a total information awareness if you don't, if you're not paying attention. Here she pointed out in Unlimited Hangout in 2021, the information that LifeLog gleaned from an individual's every interaction with technology would be combined with the information obtained from a GPS transmitter that tracked and documented the person's location, audiovisual sensors that recorded what the person saw, and said, as well as biomedical monitors like Apple Watches that gauge the person's health. Critics in mainstream media outlets and elsewhere were quick to point out that the program would inevitably be used to build profiles on dissidents as well as suspected terrorists. Combined with TIA's surveillance of individuals at multiple levels, LifeLog went further by adding physical information like how we feel and media data like what we read to this transactional data. One critic, Li Tian of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, warned at the time that the programs DARPA was pursuing, including LifeLog, have obvious, easy paths to Homeland Security deployments. At the time, DARPA publicly insisted that LifeLog and TIA weren't connected. No! Despite their obvious parallels, and that LifeLog would not be used for domestic surveillance. No, it would be used for global surveillance or clandestine surveillance. No, they'd be doing it right out in the open. However, DARPA's own documentation on LifeLog noted that the project will be able to infer the user's routines, habits, and relationships with other people, organizations, places, and objects, and to exploit these patterns to ease its task. What is that task? Which acknowledged its potential use as a tool of mass surveillance. Ding, 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 ding. The cloud of scandal that had enshrouded TIA and PAM soon came for LifeLog. For instance, Stephen Aftergood of the Federation of American Scientists told Wired at the time that LifeLog has the potential to become something like TIA cubed. Unlimited Hangout's reporting on the topic continued as follows. The firestorm of criticism of LifeLog took its program manager, Doug Gage, by surprise, and Gage has continued to assert that the program's critics completely mischaracterized the goals and ambitions of the project. Sure. Despite Gage's protests and those of LifeLog's would-be researchers and other supporters, the project was publicly nixed on February 4th, 2004. DARPA never provided an explanation for its quiet move to shutter LifeLog, with a spokesman stating only that it was related to a change in priorities for the agency. On DARPA Director Tony Tether's decision to kill LifeLog, Gage later told Vice, quote, "I think he'd been burnt out so badly with TIA that he didn't want to deal with any further controversy with LifeLog. The death of LifeLog was collateral damage tied to the death of TIA," unquote. I disagree. I think Peter Thiel had his grubby hands in this with Poindexter and all their buddies to make sure that this got shuttered, shelved, stuck in a box, and offloaded to In-Q-Tel. Fortuitously, for those supporting the goals and ambitions of LifeLog, a company that turned out to be its private sector analog was born on the same day that LifeLog's cancellation was announced. How fortunate! On February 4th, 2004, what is now known as the world's largest social network, Facebook, launched its website and quickly rose to the top of the social media roost, leaving other social media companies of the era in the dust. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the main reason why Facebook was able to so quickly rise to the top of the social media roost was thanks to the early involvement of Peter Thiel and his close associates in the company. As noted recently, Thiel had been working to privatize TIA as Palantir with his co-founders, as well as John Poindexter, Doug Gage's close personal friend, all right, the very same year he became involved with Facebook. And I remember, you see in the movie The Social Network, Zuckerberg and Sean Parker going to see Peter Thiel to get an angel investment of like $50,000. Unlimited Hangout's previous reporting on Facebook's origins revealed that Thiel, as well as Facebook's first president, Thiel associate Sean Parker, were critical to Facebook's commercial success. Facebook's success, in turn, has also proven critical to the success of Palantir. Why? Because a few months into Facebook's launch in June 2004, Facebook co-founders Mark Zuckerberg and Dustin Moskovitz brought Sean Parker into Facebook's executive team. Again, you saw this in the movie The Social Network, but done a little bit differently, how they had gotten Eduardo Saverin out. Parker, previously known for co-founding Napster, later connected Facebook with its first outside investor, Peter Thiel. As discussed, Thiel at that time, in coordination with the CIA, was actively trying to resurrect controversial DARPA programs that had been dismantled the previous year. Notably, Sean Parker, who became Facebook's first president, also had a history with the CIA, which recruited him at the age of 16, soon after he'd been busted by the FBI for hacking a corporate and military database. Thanks to Parker, in September 2004, Thiel formally acquired, $500,000 worth of Facebook shares. I said 50,000. It was $500,000 and was added to its board. Parker maintained close ties to Facebook as well as to Thiel, with Parker being hired as a managing partner of Thiel's Founders Fund in 2006. Yeah, Parker's dirty too. Thiel and Facebook co-founder Dustin Moskovitz became involved outside of the social network long after Facebook's rise to prominence, with Thiel's Founders Fund becoming a significant investor in Moskovitz's company Asana in 2012. Asana is now a huge company too. Thiel's long-standing symbiotic relationship with Facebook co-founders extends to his company, Palantir, as the data that Facebook users make public invariably winds up in Palantir's databases and helps drive the surveillance engine Palantir runs for a handful of U.S. police departments, the military, and the intelligence community. Peter Thiel was connected to another company early on that he's no longer connected to, where he's getting data that's fed into Palantir. They're called Rumble. We're streaming there right now. Don't dismiss and don't doubt that the exact same relationship that was going on with Facebook and Palantir isn't being fed from Rumble right now. Hi, Palantir. Fuck you. In the case of the Facebook Cambridge Analytica data scandal, Palantir was also involved in utilizing Facebook data to benefit the 2016 Trump presidential campaign. Yeah, they don't talk about that much. Facebook has also proven extremely beneficial to another Thiel and national security state-linked company, the facial recognition firm Clearview AI, whose facial recognition database was largely compiled by scraping images off the social media platform. Wow. Given Thiel's intimate involvement in resurrecting controversial DARPA surveillance programs from the early 2000s, i.e., Total Information Awareness and LifeLog, it's important to note that Thiel and his network were also intimately involved in the creation and success of two later efforts to resurrect the policy analysis market, the prediction market platform Augur, and more recently, the prediction market company Polymarket. All right, so again, this is unlimitedhangout.com. This is an article by Whitney, Webb, and Mark Goodwin, where they're talking about Polymarket and the origins, which are not the way that it's been sold, which is basically something out of their basement. So I'm going to start, it's about halfway down the article with the section that says enter Shane Copland. Shane Copland, the eventual founder of Polymarket, was raised in New York City, the only child of two South African college professors. Interesting that Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are also both South African. He was raised, however, solely by his mother, with Shane later describing his father as a mad scientist who studied panic disorders. Growing up middle class, Copland developed a major itch at a young age to make money, which reportedly drove his early interest in file-sharing websites, as well as later the nascent cryptocurrency industry. Yes, Afrikaner. That's right, Abby. As he developed this itch to aggressively pursue wealth, Copland simultaneously developed an obsession with the background and early rise of early 2000s tech entrepreneurs who went on to become billionaires, specifically Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg. Copland was smart, yet unmotivated, and felt like he didn't stand out enough to compete alongside his peers by conventional means. He would later tell New York Magazine, quote, "I think having a background that was so uncredentialed, it was very clear to me that I was a goner if I was going to go the path everyone else was going and just try to compete there." Kaplan ultimately determined that he would have to emulate his role models much more closely if he wanted to follow in their example and reap the rewards. This mindset soon pushed a 16-year-old Kaplan to pursue an internship at what was then one of the city's hottest startups, Genius, a lyric and web annotation company initially known as Rap Genius. Kaplan had repeatedly attempted to contact Genius's co-founders, who ignored his emails. This led him to travel straight to Genius's office, where he successfully pitched himself to the people actually running the company. Christopher Glazek, then executive editor of Genius, later wrote that, quote, "Within minutes of meeting him, I learned that Shane possessed near encyclopedic knowledge of major tech entrepreneurs, and he eagerly volunteered to add annotations to the Wikipedia pages of Mark Zuckerberg and Travis Kalanick from Uber." During the course of his Genius internship, Kaplan became the site's top expert on the Facebook founder. Notably, Genius was a 2011 Y Combinator company. That's seed funding. That same year saw Yuri Milner and Ron Conway's SV Angel become intimately involved with the startup incubator. Milner was an important early investor and an advisor to Facebook. Conway's significant connections to the people behind Facebook are discussed later in this article. 2011 was also the year that Sam Altman, recognized widely as a Peter Thiel protege, became a partner at Y Combinator. Altman would later take over the leadership of the incubator in 2014. Now you know him as the CEO of OpenAI. Our founder, and Greg Brockman's CEO. In 2014, Shane Kaplan discovered Ethereum and participated in its ICO, or initial coin offering, that same year. He subsequently developed a financial incentive to support Ethereum's progress. A since-deleted biography of Kaplan states that he moved to San Francisco sometime in 2016 to intern at Chronicled, which he described as one of the first venture-funded Ethereum startups. There, he says, he was immersed amongst a team of blockchain-obsessed tinkerers, and it was there where his eyes were opened to the vast possibilities of decentralized applications. According to a past press release, or past press releases, one of Chronicled's goals as a company included, quote, "creating a world in which physical and digital experiences are fully synchronized by offering a turnkey solution to securely register any asset identity, from art to automobiles to drones to secure shipping containers and pharmaceuticals, on the blockchain." He was a blockchain douche. All right, and here's one of these early bios, now deleted from his time as Token Union's CEO. And there's a link to the Internet Archive for that. Again, they're trying to wipe this history out to rewrite the history as to how this company was founded and came to be. People like Whitney are really inconvenient to that. One of Chronicled's main investors at the time was Pantera Capital, whose co-chief investment officer was Joey Krug, around the time that Kaplan interned at Chronicle, right? Krug, a Thiel fellow who had co-founded the Ethereum-based prediction market Augur, remember we talked about Augur last week, would subsequently join Thiel's Founders Fund. There he would become a crucial early investor in Polymarket. Krug, Augur, and their significance to this story are explored later in this article. Armed with glowing recommendations from his former superiors of both Genius and Chronicled, Kaplan was admitted to NYU to study computer science and began attending in 2016. However, he quickly became bored and disillusioned. He eventually dropped out halfway through his second semester to pursue blockchain projects full-time. He smelled the money. Shortly after, in 2017, Kaplan subsequently created a company called Token Union, which offered rewards for holding either Ethereum or ERC20 tokens. Those are tokens that are on the Ethereum network. It initially framed itself as the world's first Ethereum-based savings account. Token Union was originally founded as Token Bank, BNK, and one of its former employees, Yash Patel, has claimed that this company was the direct predecessor of Polymarket. Not us, this guy who worked there. Notably, one of the domains used by Token Bank or tokenunion.io now directs to union.market, another Copland domain. So it seems like that makes sense. The shift in Token Union domains over the years from tokenbank.com, tokenunion.io, to union.market, and finally to poly.market and polymarket.com seems to suggest that Patel was right. Lending further support to this theory is the fact that all of those domains now redirect to Polymarket. And yet they'll deny that that's what's happening. It's unreal. And here's the Bancor protocol, okay, working to integrate the Bancor protocol. Oddly, any discussion of Token Union is absent from essentially every media profile of Copland that's been written since Polymarket achieved breakout success a few years ago. All of these media profiles paint Copland's success as a derivative of pure luck and assure the reader that Polymarket began in 2020 with no real predecessor. In one of these recent media profiles, Copland asserted that he had picked the union.market because of a New York eatery he enjoyed at the time. Complete bullshit. Though he acknowledges union.market was focused on yield-bearing digital assets, neither he nor the article make any mention of his company Token Union. This is despite that the relationship documented above between the Token Union IO and union.market domains. One must wonder why Token Union has seemingly been ripped out of the narrative, not just by the mainstream media stenographers chronicling his and Polymarket's rise, but also by Copland himself. It's like he never even founded the company, because inconveniently, that company evolving into Polymarket does not really tell the story that they want to tell. One of the reasons the Token Union has seemingly been erased from current narratives about both Copland and Polymarket may lie in the Token Union's close partnership and integration with Bancor. Bancor was created by Guy and Galia Bernarzi, the nephew and niece of longtime and current Israeli Prime Minister, the war criminal himself, Benjamin Netanyahu. This is what drove Nikita Bayer so crazy to try to smear this. All right. Token Union had an integration with Bancor. So they were connected to Netanyahu's niece and nephew. Galia Bernarzi, immediately prior to creating Bancor, had been a partner at Peter Thiel's Founders Fund, where she helped lead the firm's investments in Israel. Nothing to see here. One of the main tokens showcased in Token Union's promotional material is Bancor's BNT token, and Bancor is listed among its small list of official partners. Yes, Bancor with the bank whore. That's right. Right, that's right, Katie. Right? So Bancor is listed among its small list of partners. Token Union's white paper also touted its integration with Bancor as one of its platform's main advantages. And now all of a sudden, it's like it never existed. Bancor advisor Lou Kerner was also a Token Union advisor, alongside Jim Haft, with whom Kerner created Crypto Oracle. Crypto Oracle was founded in 2017, and at the time, its founders advised Copland's Token Union. It focused on supporting early-stage blockchain firms. Bullshit. This strongly suggests that Crypto Oracle had backed Copland's company, which later claimed to have raised millions in a private pre-sale from undisclosed sources. Like Bancor, Crypto Oracle is also listed as a Token Union partner. Why else would they be listed as a Token Union partner unless they had been investing millions of dollars into the company? Kerner has major connections to Israel, to the Israeli tech startup scene, which even former Mossad directors have noted is stuffed with Israeli intelligence veterans, and which, per Israeli policy, is full of Israeli intelligence fronts posing as private companies in order to execute projects that were previously performed in-house by the Israeli intelligence apparatus, like Pegasus. Kerner, who boasts close ties to AIPAC, so the worst of the worst, previously led the Israel Founders Syndicate and is a current advisor of the Israel Blockchain Association. Kerner is also partnered in an Israeli tech incubator alongside Glilot Capital. Glilot Capital was created by two Israeli military intelligence veterans who invest specifically in entrepreneurs who emerge from the elite Unit 8200 Signals Intelligence Unit, often likened to Israel's equivalent of the NSA, like the lady that's running PragerU that we talked about before. Kerner is also notably a renowned expert on Facebook, not unlike Shane Copland himself, and claims to have once been offered a quarter of Facebook's shares by an unknown but clearly major Facebook shareholder. My guess that would be Thiel or what's his name? Sean Parker. He's since declined to specify the extent of his Facebook holdings. Kerner has claimed to have unsuccessfully pitched Mark Zuckerberg to sell him a significant stake in Facebook while Zuckerberg was still a student at Harvard. This suggests that another very early investor or figure at Facebook, aside from Zuckerberg, meaning Sean Parker, Reid Hoffman, Peter Thiel, etc., had tipped Kerner off to the social media company very early on. Since then, Kerner has also become an investor in Palantir, the privatized total information awareness that's chaired and was co-founded by Peter Thiel. Kerner previously worked at Bill Gross's Idea Lab, the first institutional investor in the Thiel-funded company PayPal. In addition to Kerner, Crypto Oracle's other co-founder Jim Haft, as well as another Crypto Oracle employee Jim Dix, are also listed as Token Union advisors. Dix is also notably listed as a former SEC prosecutor and was previously a vice president at Deutsche Bank. So you've got banking people, you've got people connected to Israel and Peter Thiel. Notably, Kerner is not the only Bancor advisor who was an advisor to Copland's Token Union. Here's another one, Steve Nerayoff, considered the legal architect of Ethereum's 2014 ICO, was simultaneously an advisor to Bancor and to Token Union. I don't see any potential conflict of interest there, do you? An archived version of Token Union's website refers to Nerayoff as the co-creator of Ethereum. It's right there. StormX, by the way, also completely under. Mess. Half these things are just all these, they're grifts. Nothing good coming out of these companies. Prior to Ethereum's ICO, the Ethereum white paper published by Vitalik Buterin in 2014 made note of an alternative consensus mechanism to proof of work, which had been popularized by Bitcoin and Ethereum 1.0. This alternative consensus mechanism was called proof of stake, or POS, like piece of shit. Proof of stake removes the mining of digital assets via large amounts of compute of specific hashing algorithms and instead creates a randomized lottery system that selects validators based on the weight of shares held in the system. In this case, how much ETH one holds in a staking contract. Instead of proof of work, rewarding a Bitcoin miner with transaction fees for finding the next block of transactions based purely on how many hashes they can compute, proof of stake rewards ETH validators with transaction fees in the form of more ETH, the amount of which is based on how many ETH you already own. It's getting interest on what you already have. While the mechanics are novel in their own right, The reality of such a system is that large capital allocators within the ETH system have a larger stake on consensus simply for holding the assets, in addition to generating the yield on their stash of tokens simply for holding them. So the ones with the most make the most and set the market. How is that decentralized at all? Prior to the fall of 2022, transition to proof of stake, termed the merge, the Ethereum Foundation worked closely with stealth startup and Palantir subcontractor Antithesis to test the new consensus mechanism. In addition, one of the main forces behind the Ethereum blockchain's move to this POS was Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin, he's a Nazi, allegedly, who had been promoting proof of stake since at least 2017. Buterin is also a Thiel Fellow who was closely connected to the founding and development of the Ethereum-based prediction platform market, Augur, which was co-founded by another Thiel Fellow, Joey Krug. So again, very incestuous. They're poking in different areas and different markets, similar models, slightly different companies, different people, different models, but in the end, they win out because one of them is going to win. Long before Ethereum allowed token holders to earn yield on their ETH stacks via POS, projects like Bancor and Copland's Token Union allowed token holders to earn ETH for simply holding their tokens, again, staking, such as the Augur token, REP. Augur's REP and Bancor's BNT were both advertised on Token Union's website, again, from the archives, offering you're getting actual ETH for holding either ETH or ERC20 tokens, which are tokens that were housed on the Ethereum network. So if you're holding them in a wallet, they'll provide you with more ETH just for letting it sit there so that they can claim as a stake and at proof of stake that there's actual money, somebody's money is actually sitting there. In addition, as the CEO of Token Union, Copland attended and was a featured speaker at a high-profile blockchain and crypto-related conferences alongside executives at major firms like Meta, Microsoft, R3, Visa, Pantera Capital, and so on. This is that ecosystem, the conference ecosystem that serves to push a narrative. At the World Blockchain Forum Conference in November 2018, Copland's speech was titled, "The Napsterization of Finance." Gross. Sometime between 2018 and 2019, Copland contacted Augur's co-founder Joey Krug, both to complain about Augur's interface and to pitch him on investments. Krug made up a random target volume of $5 million a week and told Copland he'd invest if he reached it with his proposed prediction market venture. Around this same time in 2019, Copland also reached out to none other than Robin Hanson, the system architect of DARPA's PAM. Remember, we talked about him last week. Copland that year claims to have first stumbled upon a Hanson paper entitled, "Shall We Vote on Values but Bet on Beliefs?" That Hanson paper, being the most inspirational to Copland, is notable as it's the paper where Hanson proposes a system of governance based on prediction markets called the futarchy. After reading this paper, per New York Magazine, Copland proclaimed to Hanson in a verbose email with multiple block paragraphs that he wanted to be the person to bring prediction markets to life. It couldn't have been anybody that was connected to this guy that had prior knowledge of these prediction markets, of these policy analysis markets in DARPA and in the Total Information Office. Nah, couldn't have been. Just happened to find it, right? Just happened to show up on his desk, right? Hanson was also advising Augur at the time. He's said to have largely brushed off Copland. Naturally. Copland went on to officially create Polymarket in June 2020, reportedly due to the COVID crisis, forcing him to alter course for his previous project, Union Market, and Kaplan having recently been inspired by the work of both Hansen and Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek. As the story goes, Kaplan then went on by himself and built Polymarket alone in his bathroom. Sure he did. However, that is the official narrative we've been told of Kaplan and his early interactions with figures like Krug and Hansen. As demonstrated thus far in this article, another key part of this official narrative around Kaplan and Polymarket is a lie. Kaplan didn't come out of nowhere with Polymarket in 2020 with no real prior footprint or industry connections. Kaplan, well before 2020, was speaking at high-profile conferences alongside top executives at some of the biggest companies in the industry, while also attracting, per Token Union's own claims, millions in private funding and advisors and partners with clear and obvious ties to both private and public sector of Israel and significant ties to top people in the early Ethereum network. In order to paint Kaplan's success with Polymarket as an anomaly and manufacture the appearance of luck, Token Union has been written out of the narrative. Given this effort to obfuscate Polymarket's apparent predecessor company, of which Kaplan was CEO, one can't help but wonder what else has been intentionally left out of the story. Well, let's take a look. Kaplan quoting the Teal verse. And again, Dissent has done extensive work on examining the Teal verse, as has Whitney Webb at Unlimited Hangout, which is what we're reading, by the way. Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin, Unlimited Hangout, about Polymarket and its origins. Kaplan's aforementioned years-long obsession with the trajectory of Silicon Valley billionaires, particularly Zuckerberg, is worth dwelling on in detail. During the time that Kaplan was a top expert on Zuckerberg, quote-unquote, and prior to officially founding Polymarket, several reports had been circulating about the parallels between DARPA's LifeLog and Facebook, including the unusual coincidence that Facebook launched the very same day that LifeLog was formally shuttered. It's not clear if Kaplan knew of such claims or not, but his apparent obsession with Zuckerberg's and Facebook's rise, as well as his professed desire to imitate that trajectory, suggests that he may have been aware of such claims and how they may have factored into Zuckerberg's professional success. Again, he also probably knew that Thiel was the initial seed founder of Facebook, so he probably would have gone to Thiel. Though in the event that he wasn't, Kaplan surely was aware of the crucial role played by Sean Parker and his associate Peter Thiel in Facebook's early success and the company's ability to become the dominant social media company. If Kaplan was to emulate his hero, he surely would need to find his own Sean Parker. However, evidence suggests that Kaplan not only sought to emulate Zuckerberg during Polymarket's formative period, but also Parker as well. As noted earlier, prior to founding Polymarket, Kaplan had given a speech at the World Blockchain Forum in 2018 called The Napsterization of Finance, while serving as CEO of Token Union. Remember who founded Napster. Shortly after formally creating Polymarket in 2020, Kaplan would claim that Polymarket was at the vanguard of ushering in the Napsterization of finance. In order to Napsterize finance and hold that as a central goal to your business strategy, one must know a considerable amount about the company Napster and what it would mean to Napsterize an industry. Given that Sean Parker infamously founded Napster after the CIA made attempts to recruit him as a teen, Kaplan surely saw both Napster and Parker as models to follow, especially given that Parker was also the first president of Facebook and crucially brought Facebook its first big-name investors, like Thiel, thus making him critical to the success of Kaplan's admitted idol, Zuckerberg. Disgusting to idolize somebody like Mark Zuckerberg. And here's their link between worlds, Sean Parker. Remember, in the Social Network movie about this that Aaron Sorkin directed and produced. Sean Parker was played by Justin Timberlake. And to me, it was actually one of his best roles that he's ever played. He was brilliant. He actually made Sean Parker likable. Sean Parker, let's do a little deep dive, was born in 1979, Fairfax County, Virginia, to an advertiser and an oceanographer. While plenty has been written about Parker's, surprisingly few writers have explored the interesting and relevant background of his father. They always look at the parents. Bruce Parker Jr., not Ray, but Bruce Parker Jr. Ray Parker Jr. did the Ghostbusters song. Sean's father spent years working for various government oceanic institutes across the United States, including stints as the chief scientist in NOAA, a director of the Coast Survey Development Lab, and a former director of the World Data Center for Oceanography, among others. Should ask Reef about that. His mom is also in ocean science. During his time at the NOAA, from 1974 through October of 2004, it's 30 years, his department worked closely with CIA in a data-sharing effort spearheaded by Vice President Gore, known as Project Medea. Parker's then boss at NOAA, D. James Baker, was a critical part of Project Medea's team. Years later, in 2009, Parker Jr. became an active member of the EDGE Foundation, founded by John Brockman. Remember, Greg Brockman is the OpenAI CEO, and largely financed by one Jeffrey Epstein. Womp womp. He even penned an introduction for an EDGE special event in 2011 titled When We Cannot Predict, in which the first sentence claims that prediction is the very essence of science. Prior to his time at NOAA, Parker Sr., or Ben Parker Jr., worked directly with the U.S. Navy, including a summer at the U.S. Naval Underwater Sound Laboratory and 2 years supplying the DoD with data as an oceanographer at the U.S. Naval Oceanographic Office. Easy for me to say. Notably, the NOAA and the Navy have long partnered frequently on joint ventures, whereby NOAA technology and data are used for both military and civilian objectives, like dual use. All right. Sean's grandfather, water skiing pioneer Bruce Parker Sr., had his own history with the Navy, helping them train porpoises in the Caribbean. The water ski schools owned and operated by Parker Sr. were partnered with Harry Conover, whose modeling agency was seeded by former U.S. President Gerald Ford, and whose wife at the time, Candy Jones, later became the earliest MK Ultra whistleblower years before the Church Committee exposed the CIA project's existence. Wow. So his grandfather had links to MK Ultra. Did not know that. While his father's lengthy career at NOAA and the Navy likely saw him brush up against the intelligence community and intelligence assets at times, Sean Parker's own trajectory would see him interact much more closely with these groups. According to a 2011 Forbes profile on Sean Parker, the FBI rated the 15-year-old then hacker for illegally hacking into websites associated with government services and a Fortune 500 company. He was ultimately let off with community service. During his community service sentence, Parker described meeting a punk rock princess with whom he lost his virginity as an incredible cosmic irony. Parker furthered it was the most romantic experience of my life, and that he met her only because I'd been raided by the FBI. As the story goes, shortly thereafter, Parker was then recruited by the CIA himself after his success at a local computer science fair. Parker has claimed that when presented with the CIA's offer, he instead chose to work at Mark Pincus's startup, Freeloader. He could have done both. He later joined the DC-based internet service provider UUNet. That's a company that claims to have been the first commercial ISP that employed many former members of DARPA who had built an early iteration of the internet known as ARPANET. Parker's former boss, Mark Pincus, later founded the juggernaut Facebook game company Zynga. Everybody knows them from Words with Friends, which at one point accounted for around 10% of the social media giant's income. They ran that into the ground. Facebook gaming is a butchered mess. Pincus would also come to work with and invest alongside Parker, including in Polymarket, after making critical early investments in several earlier Parker-linked companies, such as Napster and Facebook. And there's Parker and Pincus. Parker's on the left with the beard. You see how they made Sean, what's his name? Justin Timberlake look like him. Around the same time Parker began programming at UUNet, Microsoft acquired a 13% stake in the company. And in an August 2011 email to Jess Staley, Jeffrey Epstein implied that Parker, using his teams at Facebook and Spotify, were affiliated with Gates and his entourage. While Parker should have been in high school, he instead earned $80,000 his senior year and wasn't going to school. According to Parker, quote, "I was technically in a co-op program, but in truth was just going to work." It was during this period that Parker met fellow teenager Sean Fanning online and alongside a couple friends founded the quick-to-fail internet security firm Crosswalk. While not much is available about the firm online today, seemingly the concept was that two hackers, Sean and Sean, would share their expertise on breaking into online systems with companies looking to strengthen their cybersecurity. After his senior year, and with his co-op program earnings in hand, Parker put off pursuing college to fly out to San Francisco and co-found the pioneering music sharing site Napster with Fanning. Parker referred to his time at Napster as Napster University, explaining that it was a crash course in intellectual property law, corporate finance, entrepreneurship, and law school. Parker furthered that some of the emails I wrote when I was just a kid who didn't know what he was doing are apparently in law school textbooks. Despite Napster eventually succumbing to a deluge of high-profile litigation, Parker's model for disregarding bureaucracy and legislation in the pursuit of technological disruption was established by the young founder's indifference to the legal context surrounding his company's services. And what he's basically saying is that he put the record industry out of business with his service, with Napster, which he made available for free to everyone. And then they sued him into oblivion for violating copyright. Now we get to Ron Conway, an early investor in PayPal and Google, among other stalwarts, met Parker and Fanning, the Seans, at the onset of Napster and has backed practically every Parker project since. It's done nothing but making money. Fanning later referred to Conway as like family to me, explaining that he is such a big part of who I am today. Yeah, he bankrolls you. However, not every Parker-backed venture was a success, such as the failed startup Plaxo, which sought to auto-update a person's email-based address book and was later called a precursor to social networking. Parker was infamously forced out of that company in 2004. I remember Plaxo. So what they basically did was they got everyone to update their contact information, and then they had you sync your address book and then told you, hey, we saw in somebody else's contacts that this person's phone number's been updated. Is this the right one or is that one? And then they built like a master database. That was the precursor to Facebook. Shortly after being kicked out of Plaxo, Parker saw a simply designed website, thefacebook.com, on the computer owned by his roommate's girlfriend, who was then attending Stanford. That's not how it was presented in the social network. It was a girl that he had hooked up with for the night, who was actually like the dean's daughter or something, who was in a French minor. Parker immediately emailed its creator Mark Zuckerberg, much like what he had done with Fanning, and offered to help with his website. And again, there's a famous scene of Justin Timberlake discovering what's the Facebook, and the girl saying it's addicting. And he goes, I need to find you, Mark Zuckerberg. Really good movie. Matt Kohler, who joined Facebook shortly after Parker, noted the similarity himself. Quote, Napster and Facebook are two of the most significant companies in the history of the internet, and in both cases, Parker spotted them earlier than anyone, other than the people who invented them. By June 2004, Parker had moved into the infamous Facebook villa and became an essential player in the construction of the juggernaut Facebook, now Meta, is today. And again, the social network will go into a lot of this with flowery revisionist history that makes Zuckerberg and Parker look like heroes and Eduardo Saverin look like a dumbass who had his company stolen out from under him, but still ended up getting a ton of money in a buyout. While Conway decided to initially pass on investing due to concerns with Parker's then failing Plaxo's contact book application, the second person they called, early PayPal employee and Pincus's longtime friend Reid Hoffman, we know him, was too busy founding LinkedIn and instead connected the duo with his former boss, Peter Thiel. Thiel quickly invested and joined the board. Joining Thiel and Hoffman was Hoffman's close friend and Parker's former boss, Mark Pincus. Again, all these names coming around again and again and again. Forbes later referred to Parker as an early Facebook business veteran who helped the college-aged Facebook founders network around Silicon Valley, set up routers and benevolent investors like Thiel, Hoffman, and Pincus. Forbes also quotes Zuckerberg as stating that Sean was pivotal in helping Facebook transform from a college project into a real company, suggesting that without Sean Parker, Facebook's enormous success may not have materialized at all. And if he hadn't connected it to Peter Thiel, he might be right. Parker, Zuckerberg, and Thiel went on to change the internet and paved the way for further exploration of the concepts of digital identity, digital content distribution, digital community, and even digital currency. All essential pillars of the now blossoming prediction market industry. In 2005, Parker was accused of possessing cocaine during a house party at a rental under his name, and although he was never charged, he was essentially forced off of the Facebook board. Despite this, Thiel has claimed that he does not think Sean ever really left Facebook and has continued to be involved in many ways. And again, that whole cocaine incident was also documented in the Social Network movie. The next year in 2006, Parker was hired by Thiel and became a partner at Thiel's Founders Fund. There, he famously courted and advised the team behind Spotify to legally commercialize the digital music industry, succeeding exactly where Napster had quote-unquote failed. Thiel reiterated his admiration for Parker, referring to him as a brilliant entrepreneur who's somehow transforming the United States and is not yet understood by society. Again, Thiel, Zuckerberg, and Parker. Oh, Howry, right, Ken Howry from Founders Fund. Not long after, Parker had stated that it's technology, not business or government, that's the real driving force behind large-scale societal shifts. Yeah, technology funded by the government, dummy. This idea is similar to those expressed by Parker's boss, Thiel, who has described technology as a way to exert unilateral change on the world. That's frightening, and it's therefore an incredible alternative to politics. Given that Thiel views technology as the most effective way to exert unilateral change on a society and as a way to bypass public consent, his view that Parker and his companies have been key to transforming the United States takes on increased significance. One should also consider the early role of Parker and Thiel at Facebook alongside their respective connections to the American national security state. Parker had early run-ins with the FBI and was sought out by the CIA. As detailed earlier in this piece, Thiel was also actively working to privatize at least some programs of DARPA's Information Awareness Office at the time Parker contacted him about the Facebook.com. Having just privatized DARPA's TIA program into Palantir, Thiel and perhaps Parker certainly saw in Facebook a company that could be molded to serve as more than just a social network. Thiel likely saw its utility as an analog for the shuttered sister project of TIA, LifeLog, particularly given the fact that Thiel was known to have been meeting with John Poindexter, the close friend of LifeLog's project manager Doug Gage, during this time. Thiel's fondness for Parker and his belief that Parker has played a major role in transforming the United States may lie in Parker's outsized role in developing what we could call the Napsterization model for a given industry that many Thiel-linked ventures have since followed. Parker's Napster, even though it failed, was able to test the regulatory environment and determine what was needed for a successor to emerge as the dominant de facto monopoly in that industry with the blessing of regulators. In the case of Napster's successor Spotify, it was Parker, then at Thiel's Founders Fund, who spotted a worthy vessel for his ultimate ambition, that began with Napster. Subsequently, this Napsterization model has been applied in several Thiel-linked companies, including Facebook itself via its attempts to launch its Libra stablecoin, as detailed previously by Unlimited Hangout. For example, Facebook itself faced many legal battles during its formative years and thus employed many heavy hitters with ties to the public sector as legal counsel, including former State Department official Jennifer Newstead, who previously helped draft the Patriot Act. Another former Facebook lawyer, Ted Ulyat, had worked in George W. Bush's White House before Facebook. Ulyat himself was suggested to Zuckerberg by Paul Cappuccio, a lawyer who had successfully represented AOL in its landmark litigation regarding EU approval. That's an outcome that helped globally enshrine American-made interests during the Internet's proliferation. Both Cappuccio and Ulyat worked at Kirkland and Ellis, the law firm hired to defend Jeffrey Epstein, while Cappuccio helped Parker and Thiel deregulate and disrupt the electronic cigarette market as the general counsel for the now bankrupt Enjoy, the first e-vape company to receive FDA approval. You see, all these guys are behind all the most evil shit that's now dismantling our society, reshaping America into the whore system that it is today. All right? This Napsterization model is evident in Koplin's comments about token union, which he once referred to as an economic experiment that could ultimately prove to be an integral part and one of the leading methods of storing value in the token ecosystem of tomorrow. Tokens are shitcoins. It is certainly interesting that Koplin would be able to attract millions of dollars in seed funding from figures such as Lou Kerner and become deeply partnered with Bancor for something that was seen as an economic experiment and not a viable for-profit company. That is, of course, unless the goal of both Koplin and his backers at Token Union was economic experimentation with the goal of Napsterizing major aspects of this industry with a focus on the Ethereum ecosystem. Meaning that they wanted to Napsterize banking. Notably, in a recent media profile, Koplin was asked if he viewed Polymarket as a technological descendant of Napster, to which Koplin said, "There are parallels." Sure. While Koplin was building the Ethereum-focused Token Union, the Ethereum-based prediction market platform Augur was taking off. advised by Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin and Robin Hanson, who had founded the policy analysis market under DARPA, and financed in part by a Thiel Fellowship, Augur eventually failed to succeed in creating a globally successful prediction market. Developed and maintained by the Forecast Foundation nonprofit, Augur had hinted before it became largely relevant and Krug left the foundation that it would offer a widely anticipated for-profit spin-off. That's weird. Shortly after Krug stopped working on Augur, he joined Sean Parker at Thiel's Founders Fund. So everybody works for Peter Thiel. That's what we're learning. In keeping with the Napsterization model, Krug and Founders Fund, with lessons learned from Augur, would become early investors and advisors to the for-profit Polymarket. How convenient that they don't get it right as a not-for-profit, but once it's for-profit, they sure as shit get it right. Thiel isn't human. Fight me. I'm not fighting you. I think, hey, look, he's an anagram for the reptile. Peter Thiel is an anagram. If you rearrange the letter, it literally spells out the reptile. All right. In keeping with that Napsterization model, Krug and Founders Fund, with lessons learned from Augur, would become early investors and advisors in Polymarket for profit. Krug has since commented on the symmetry between the evolution of Napster into Spotify via Sean Parker at Founders Fund and the evolution of Augur into Polymarket via Krug's role at Founders Fund. Every time it's Peter Thiel. So who's Joey Krug? Augur, Ethereum, and market force divination. Joey Krug's young, born in 1995. Began mining Bitcoin in his bedroom in May 2011, around 15. By late 2013, he was inspired by a recent price surge to pursue cryptocurrency more seriously and began a Bitcoin club at his university, eventually founding a Bitcoin point-of-sale company. In 2014, he teamed up with his college friend Jeremy Gardner and a computer scientist named Jack Peterson to put together a decentralized prediction market called Augur. Augur was inspired and derived from Bitcoin-based project called Truthcoin. The first version of the white paper for Truthcoin was first published in December 2013 by Paul Stork. What happened? Interestingly, only 3 years before the renewed interest in cryptocurrency-based prediction markets, DARPA's sister agency, the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity, IARPA, which is responsible for paying for experimental projects for the U.S. intelligence community, announced that they were launching a 4-year, $50 million program that would pay people willing to predict major world events. This program, known as Aggregative Contingent Estimation, or ACE, was headed by Jason Matheny. After running ACE and later IARPA as a whole, Matheny launched the Center for Security and Emerging Technology, or CSET, with a $55 million grant from the Open Philanthropy Project, co-founded by Facebook co-founder Dustin Moskovitz, again, partner of Peter Thiel. The ACE program officially ended in June 2015, shortly after Krug formalized the not-for-profit entity tied to Augur's development, the Forecast Foundation. So again, they learn as not-for-profits. Then once they have the model worked out, they shut down the not-for-profit, run it into the ground, and open it up as a for-profit entity. Take the bones and the concepts. Soon after the launch of the Ethereum network in 2014, Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin approached Krug. Buterin had recently received a Thiel Fellowship to further the development of Ethereum. Buterin convinced Krug to develop what would become the prediction market Augur, not on Bitcoin as originally planned, but on Ethereum. Buterin argued that doing so would allow Krug to take advantage of a more expressive smart contract programming language than what was available on Bitcoin. I don't understand the difference between that shit. I do know that the gas fees now on Ethereum are out of sight and a lot more expensive to transact than to transact Bitcoin. And that is because of the success of Ethereum and the growth into thousands of dollars a coin. So this is him presenting a single slideshow integrating Augur's logo alongside the logos of DARPA's failed PAM initiative and InTrade, which once collaborated on PAM. So Krug and his team, now counting Buterin as an advisor, then founded the Forecast Foundation in Estonia in December of 2014. Something else happened in 2014, the Maidan coup. Interesting that this is all going on in Ukraine, right around the time that Pierre Omidyar is funding the Maidan coup. Thiel worked for Omidyar at eBay and PayPal. Do you see how this is all linked and connected? Another advisor, Ron Bernstein, was the co-founder of InTrade, which we mentioned earlier. Previously had partnered with DARPA to provide data for their PAM experiments. Bernstein's TradeSports.com, which had acquired InTrade in 2003, had leased the tech to the Forecast Foundation behind Augur in exchange for REP tokens, Bitcoin, created during their groundbreaking fundraiser, leading TradeSports.com to amass a large ETH stake after it converted its REP token holdings into ETH. Interestingly, during this same time, Augur co-founder Jeremy Gardner posted in 2015 that some on the Augur team were speaking to a few several-letter agencies to help them understand the technology we're building. Gardner went so far as to say that the DoD, DARPA, and CIA are huge fans of Augur, and that the prediction market platform it sought to build. Of course. Upon leaving Augur in a messy lawsuit, Gardner joined Blockchain Capital, an influential cryptocurrency venture firm founded by Tether co-founder Brock Pierce, who also has child molestation ties, links to Peter Thiel, and other Bitcoin douches like Steve Bannon. All right. Also features prominently in the Chain series. Right. Okay. And that's a series at Unlimited Hangout talking about the origins of blockchain. Notably, the Augur team soon added the architect of DARPA's failed PAM prediction market, Robin Hanson, as an advisor. The Augur logo notably bears significant similarities to the logos of DARPA's failed TIA and PAM projects, i.e. a one-eyed pyramid. In fact, the profile on Augur from 2018 notes that Krug, one of his co-founders, and two unnamed Augur advisors, one of which was likely Hansen, had explicitly decided to make Augur's logo a pyramid with 3 points converging upon an all-seeing eye. This, among other similarities, suggests that Augur was an effort to resurrect PAM, particularly given that in a few short years, Thiel's tentacles would extend deeply into Augur and were already present indirectly via Buterin's Thiel Fellowship. And again, there's your all-seeing eye of the world and a chart from the triangle. Okay? There's the total information awareness again, eye from the triangle looking at the world. And here's Augur, an eye inside a triangle. Also spelling out the letter A, which is interesting. In the fall of 2015, the Forecast Foundation and Augur operated and the first ever ICO on the Ethereum blockchain with their token REP. Reports from October it was also probably the first rug pull, by the way. Reports from October 2015 during its ICO claim that Augur was courting 4 major banks, in addition to a partnership with IBM Watson in efforts to develop a closed source alternative to Augur. This fundraising method, analogous to the initial public offering, came to dominate the remainder of the decade in the crypto space, leading to its pioneer Krug to eventually join two of the most influential investing firms in the industry, Pantera Capital and Peter Thiel's Founders Fund. In June 2016, Krug himself was awarded a Thiel Fellowship to further develop Augur. The next year, he joined Dan Moorhead's Pantera Capital as a co-chief investor officer, or a CIO, in 2017. Okay. That year in June 2017, he, in a post published on his Medium account announcing his Pantera appointment, Krug specifically noted that this would help solve a dire need for liquidity on Augur, even stating that Pantera would be actively trading on it. Quote, once Augur's out, we can even trade on it, which will increase liquidity and be good for everyone. There are no set allocations for anything in the fund. It's all about capacity and what we can spend the money on that is the best investment or most profitable. If 1 million people show up day one of Augur's full release, then there's probably no need or edge for us to trade. But if it does not happen, we will trade as long as we have an edge. This is an altruism. We're not planning to lose money to attract users to Augur. However, since we have an edge, even in markets like Bitcoin, we will almost certainly have an edge on Augur markets for quite a while. Yeah, because nobody even knows what the fuck Augur is yet. In July 2018, Augur released its primordial iteration based on the native Ethereum network token ETH and its rep token that had been created during its groundbreaking ICO. According to Krug, version 1 of Augur was a, quote, very slow, expensive, difficult to use version, unquote, and left users exposed to varying price fluctuations of tokens. As the Augur blog noted in 2021, version 1 was really the first real-world deployment of a free and open prediction market, which, quote, allowed the community to test many hypotheses and ideas that had been written about for decades prior by many academics, software engineers, and free market information enthusiasts. In other words, it was an economic experiment. Version 2 of Augur, launched in 2020, replaced the unit of account with a stablecoin, specifically using DAI, an algorithmic stablecoin managed by MakerDAO. You should recognize MakerDAO because they actually, I believe, created the Assange DAO, which nobody knows what happened to that. Despite version 2 solving a lot of issues from version 1, it became clear that Augur was too resource intensive to live fully on Ethereum mainnet. Due to this, and because of the evolution of externally traded Augur shares on existing automated markets, the Forecast Foundation was ultimately led to launch Augur Turbo in 2021. This gets really wonky. Augur Turbo partnered with Oracle provider Chainlink and Ethereum Layer 2, Polygon, all right, both infrastructure partners that Polygon would utilize only a few years later. I have no idea what that sentence means. I don't understand this shit for the most. Once you get really into the weeds. And that's what this is. These decisions to move towards L2s and stablecoins were anything but trivial. There's layer 2. Okay, now I don't know what the difference between layer 2 and layer 1. All right. In fact, Krug himself has expressed that without crypto, prediction markets would be unable to function. Really important line right there. According to Krug, two of the main pillars of prediction market industry at large, a 24/7 global internet-based market and practically irreversible transactions, help unlock prediction markets' ability to function and succeed. In a traditional online betting market, with legacy financial rails such as credit cards, there are few legal protections for bookmakers to successfully fend off scams in the event of a market loser claiming that their losing bet was made fraudulently. The credit card company ultimately becomes the oracle of the payout, meaning that it solely holds the decision to settle the funding transaction even after the event the bet is predicated on has passed. Cryptocurrency also helps market makers circumnavigate laws, such as the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, which prohibits gambling businesses from knowingly accepting payments in connection with the participation of another person in a bet or wager that involves the use of the internet. This is why you have no online casinos, or had no online casinos, for a long time in the U.S. You're now seeing a lot of that stuff drop. You're now seeing Bet365 and a lot of these casino apps in states where betting has been legalized. In Atlantic City and Pennsylvania and those kind of things, you're now seeing online bets. One of the hill things, I can't think of it now. They also have a betting market, right? For example, the user could bet $100 that the U.S. would win the World Cup, and even after the team's eliminated and the terms of the bet are closed, said user could phone their credit card company, claim the bet was made fraudulently, and ask for the funds to be returned. In contrast, when a bet such as this is made using stablecoins in the form of a smart contract, even prior to the completion of the terms of the bet, the payouts are already funded and set to be distributed. Unfortunately, the use of crypto alone does not completely remove the need for trust in such a scenario, with a smart contract innately requiring an oracle to feed the correct market outcome data, which then triggers the payouts. This issue, known colloquially as the oracle problem, and how it relates to Polymarket's legal standing and centralization, is to be discussed in greater detail in part 2 of this investigation. While he was still at Augur, Joey Krug received an email from Polymarket CEO to be Shane Coplin describing ideas to improve Augur, and sent further repeated investment pitches for Pantera's then CIO to consider. Krug explained that prediction markets are one of the hardest types of startups to build, and that while there have been dozens, none of them hit escape velocity. As noted earlier in this piece, the Augur co-founder told Coplin that if he could create a prediction market that reached a target volume of $5 million a week, then he would invest. All right? So that's Joey Krug. All right? That was when he was a partner at Founders Fund, co-founder at Eco, and co-founder at Augur. He's a Silicon Valley tech bro, deeply connected to Peter Thiel. During and after his time at Augur, Krug participated in many advisory roles within the cryptocurrency industry, notably including a 2019 appointment to run the advisory board of a novel dollar stablecoin project called Ampleforth, or AMP. Ampleforth was created to develop a dollar stablecoin that fluctuates its supply based on external information, like the CPI, in order to stabilize purchasing power. Okay. How do you fluctuate your supply? So you literally take some out of circulation? This project brought Krug's expertise in cryptocurrency-based prediction markets alongside giants of the retail service data industry, including former employees of Google and Uber and Facebook, all companies that have notably pioneered data-driven predictions as part of their commercial products. For example, one Uber former employee who joined Ampleforth worked on Uber Places, which necessitated autocomplete search, destination prediction, and current location prediction, and became the primary engineering point during a multi-year maps contract between Google and Uber. I don't know if any of you have used the Uber app, but as you start typing an address, it will automatically go to fill it in for you based upon all different factors, mostly based on where you are and the number of potential results that could be shown and its distance from where you are. Uber was notorious for hiring former intelligence officers including former CIA, FBI, and NSA employees. And it reportedly amassed a high-functioning corporate espionage force. Its founder, Travis Kalanick, was a fellow peer-to-peer data pioneer, having developed a program similar to Napster called Scour before he led a hostile, technology-driven takeover of the world's taxi industry. As noted earlier, Kalanick was the other tech billionaire that Kaplan closely studied, in addition to Mark Zuckerberg, and was the other figure alongside the Facebook founder that Kaplan has acknowledged he sought to emulate. Kalanick and his company's utter dismissal of the current legislative environment while building the disruptive ride-sharing business would go on to greatly influence Kaplan's indifference to the law, i.e. his act first, apologize later model, while Polymarket was breaking ground during and before the 2024 election cycle. The similarities between Napster, Facebook, Uber, and Polymarket include their legal disruption as a service business models and their formative operations within a regulatory gray area, if not simply illegal. Other areas of overlap will be discussed below and in part 2, which hasn't been published yet, by the way. Alongside Krug on AMP's board sat members of the Hoover Institute, we know who they are, an eventual technical project manager of Facebook's stablecoin project Libra, which was a failure, and an early influential Facebook employee, Sam Lessin. Lessin was a former classmate of Zuckerberg's at Harvard, who sold his company to Facebook and formally joined the company in 2010. Lessin also played a crucial role during the company's founding as his father, Wall Street banker Robert Lessin, quote, took Zuckerberg around New York to meet with venture capitalists and executives in the finance and media industries, unquote, after their spring semester in 2004. That also, by the way, is showcased in the movie The Social Network, when Zuckerberg is literally going to different VCs. Aaron Sorkin actually plays one of the people that he goes and visits, and Justin Timberlake, who's playing Sean Parker, sets up an argument or a thing with this guy and screws with him, and the guy ends up throwing him out of his office and promising to never do business with him. And then right afterwards, they got the Peter Thiel investment, allegedly, the way that timeline worked. Krug, having joined Thiel's Founders Fund in April of 2023 to formally partner with both Thiel and Sean Parker to help shape the next decade of Founders Fund crypto strategy, promptly led a $45 million investment round in Polymarket. The investment was announced in 2024, shortly after Kaplan met his fabled $5 million a week trading volume mark. In a December 2025 interview, Krug described Augur as failing while Polymarket has succeeded, mainly because the timing was just wrong and we were way too early. I think a few other things have happened. Yeah, the timing because of who was president and the regulatory environment. Krug furthered that hopefully we inspired some people to build in the space, and maybe Augur is Napster and Polymarket is Spotify. They would very much like it to be that. Now we get to the Napsterization of everything. So what that means is we're going to create a model that will break the industry existing, one that is designed to fail, but one where a phoenix can arise in its ashes under a similar model commercially and succeed, and gouge everyone and make billions to trillions of dollars. The story has been carefully crafted over the past few years. That a young college dropout named Shane Kaplan, after being inspired by Austrian economists and Robin Hansen, founded Polymarket in mid-2020 completely alone and then built his company in his bathroom. Yeah, while he was sitting and taking a shit, he had his laptop on his lap, right? As detailed extensively in this article, there is plenty of background information and key data points that have been clearly left out of this story in order for this particular narrative of Shane Coplin's and Polymarket's origins to take hold. This narrative bears many similarities to the stories that have been woven regarding the origins of major big tech firms, whose founders Coplin explicitly hoped to emulate. In many of those cases, these founders are said to have built their companies in their garage or something similarly humble, only for it to trickle out years later that their company's success stories were only made possible by funding provided by either U.S. intelligence or similarly shady organizations and groups. In the case of Coplin, despite efforts made to obfuscate his past, he was clearly immersed in networks within the cryptocurrency agency with ties to Israel and Israeli intelligence well before he founded Polymarket. During this time, he talked about the Napsterization of finance, only to have the venture capital firm of Napsters, Sean Parker, and crypto prediction market pioneer Joey Krug be among the first backers of Polymarket. Joey Krug claims that Polymarket was successful, again where others were not, because of its preferable user interface. In reality, it was Coplin's connections to the networks he developed while running Token Union, combined with his careful study and emulation of Sean Parker of Napster, Travis Kalanick of Uber, and Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, that made Coplin and his company a success. Also, his fealty to one Peter Thiel. If there's a pattern emerging from this disruption nexus of prediction market makers, peer-to-peer data pioneers, and social network founders, perhaps it's the brazen disinterest in upholding the law during their respective incubation and early growth periods. Actually, it's the opposite. They flouted the law in every case. Due to the proximity of these businesses to the ideas that stem from the likes of DARPA and the U.S. intelligence community, it's arguable that these companies were silently given a free pass to build where others could not, and quickly gained an insurmountable market share from being the first movers in an otherwise illegal market. First to build almost always wins. But regardless of a hypothetical state-sponsored get-out-of-jail-free card, these generations of Silicon Valley's best and brightest quite literally changed the limits of their industry by changing the rules of their regulators. Parker's Napster was blatantly illegal, as was Kalanick's Uber, and yet both models survived in their own way. Uber stopped paying fines on behalf of drivers and started lobbying local, state, and federal government, while the Napster founder funded and advised Spotify into becoming the largest music streaming service in the world. A willingness to break the rules while building a company combined with teaming up with the right people, invariably tied to the military or intelligence or both, is the recipe that Coplin studied and then emulated in building Polymarket. As both Krug and Coplin have alluded to, Polymarket's path seems closer to the Napster into Spotify model, in which Augur built the infrastructure and demonstrated the market demand for the product that Polymarket and Kalshi are now delivering. The similarities between the companies of this nexus are immense. Young founders were raided by the FBI. The companies had employees who boasted working, likely collaborating, with the intelligence community. They started as companies that potentially offered illegal services. They were advised and funded by the Thiel, Conway, and Pincus network at a young age. They rode waves of political favors and regulatory tide shifts toward eventual legitimacy. And finally, many of them seem to be awfully similar to the same family of controversial projects once housed at DARPA. Also, all of them are now billionaires. Kalanick, Coplin, Zuckerberg, Parker, Thiel. Krug, I'm guessing. Another argument to be made is that the government, whether demonstrated by actions of various legislative agencies, court systems, and law enforcement, was only feigning resistance to these founders and companies. Under the cover of fines, raids, and court summons, these intelligence and military-backed technology companies were painted as outsiders fighting against the legacy systems, while in actuality pursuing the very interests of the Pentagon and the intelligence community. Indeed, as this article makes clear, the military and intelligence community have long been fans of prediction markets, whether PAM or Augur or now Polymarket. Look at what it did in the Kentucky House race, where you watched the Polymarket odds swing, and within the last week, all of a sudden, money started flowing towards Gallerin because somebody clearly knew that he was going to win, and they profited a ton that week. Now I see the same thing happening with Haley Stevens versus Abdul El-Sayed in the Michigan primary. With Polymarket's odds now capable of moving the stock market, manipulating the media, and even influencing elections, the real architects of the explosion in prediction markets have a new tool that allows them not only unprecedented predictive power, but also unprecedented abilities to insider trade while they seed select narratives and alter our digital reality. As will be explored in part 2, the fact that both Joey Krug and Shane Copland were inspired specifically by Robin Hansen's work on Futarchy, which proposes using prediction markets as a system of public governance, AI governance is coming, is highly significant. They're going to basically use Polymarket as the model that you're going to be able to vote on laws, that you're going to be able to vote on ballot initiatives potentially. That's their system. And of course, they control all the switches. Perhaps even more significant is the fact that Futarchy is already taking hold in significant ways under the current administration. A turn of events that's particularly jarring, considering that the president's son is both invested in and advising Polymarket and advising Kalshi and invested in it through 1789 Capital. As broached here, but explored in greater detail in the next part of this investigation, which of course I'm going to read on this show, Polymarket's success heralds a new era for both finance and for governance, one where the House always wins. Trump likes that phrase, even though he's invested in multiple casinos that have gone bankrupt. Man, what a mess. What a nightmare that you have all of these players all working together to manipulate global markets and profit from world events. Man, what a mess. So that was, again, UnlimitedHangout.com, Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin. The Secret History of Polymarket, Part 1. Become a paid subscriber over there if you can. It's $5 a month. I've been a paid subscriber for years. Whitney and Mark actually just released and published their very first podcast together on the relaunched Unlimited Hangout YouTube channel. So I encourage everyone also to go and watch that podcast where they talk about Polymarket and predictive markets. And I think it's about a 25-minute podcast is the first episode. And if you're a paid subscriber, you'll get early access to episodes of the new podcast. So, what does everyone think about Polymarket? OMB, I see OMB here. Everybody pretty quiet during that segment. I don't know what's going on. But, okay. So, Denver Attaway makes me wonder if other people might have come to such work outside of the controlled players and narrative. Note the countless crypto entrepreneurs and exchange founders murdered, often in gruesome ways. Yeah, agree. Okay. And yeah, don't be evil. Now it's just be evil once you have total dominance. That's what Google's doing. Absolutely. Yep. So that was the final portion of part one. And Polymarket is making a big splash. It's straight gambling for some. And for those who have insider knowledge, it's a lot more than gambling. It's a way to pump and increase your net worth, with insider trading that is very hard to track and regulate. Just how, and when you're getting that information, how it's being used, when the trades are being made, etc. Okay, so support independent media because we need it more than ever. You know the ways to do it. Cash App, $, Indie News Network, code-v.com/Indie News Network, paypal.me/Indie News Network as friends and family. Monthly, you can subscribe at patreon.com/Indie News Network. You can sub monthly or annually at Indie Media Today. That's my Substack. Or at INN's newsletter. That's INNnewsletter.com. That's their Substack for the network. Okay. Or you can leave a tip over at IndieNewsNow.com under the Keep the Media Free section. That is a 24/7 fire hose of streaming news from over 100 different outlets, including antiwar.com and Mint Press News. And a lot of the articles, including the Unlimited Hangout article that I just read, was actually linked there when it first published. And again, I just appreciate everyone for supporting me, for supporting INN, and for supporting independent media. You know what to do, fam. I love you all. Support independent media, and we'll see you next Tuesday. No! We just fucking lost the stream!
I guess this isn't such an awful place. Is that what you want me to say? You prove it's possible to sleep for days, and I still think you're right here awake. The cost of living isn't much to make, but God, it's so hard to say. And when we told you everything was safe, were you safe? Were you safe?